Welcome to day 4 of our top line challenge. On day 1 I explained what I mean by the term top line, what that includes, and why it's interesting to analyze it or observe how it's shaped. I know it's boring. On day 2 we showed you some examples of good top lines and not so good top lines, so that you can use them to understand your own horse's top line better, to evaluate your horse's top line. And on day 3 we showed you some examples of typical rider mistakes that would prevent the horse from using his top line correctly. So in today's video I will talk a little bit about why it is more effective usually to begin the building process of the top line with groundwork, like lunging, double lunging, work in hand, long reining, rather than with the rider's weight in the saddle on the horse's back. Because snap. So beginning the building of the top line is often easier or more effective if you don't start with the rider's weight on the horse's back, especially if they don't have much muscling yet, right? Because thanks to gravity, the rider's weight on the horse's back tends to drop the back of the horse. So it makes it more difficult for the horse to lift the back and lift the withers if there's something pressing down from above. So you can give the horse a certain basic muscle tone and muscle strength on the lunge line, at the double lunge line, in hand, and so on. So that he can then deal with the rider's weight more easily and carry the rider more easily in a healthier posture. Whereas if the horse is under-muscled and then you add the rider's weight on the horse's back, then it makes the horse's job much harder. It makes the trainer's job much harder to get the horse to go through the back, on the bit, etc. And often the training process really has to start even before the athletic part. Often horses have poor body awareness. They don't really know how many legs they have. They don't know where their feet are. They don't know really where the weight is, or what options they have of supporting the weight. They typically have a favorite front leg that always has to support all the weight. And when you try to balance the horse and shift the weight to the other side of the body or more onto the hind legs, the horses can get scared, because they either don't realize they have legs on the other side of the body, or they are afraid that the legs are not strong enough and that they might snap off if they use them for support. So very often it is better if you do some body awareness training on the ground, that at the halt, at the walk, or whatever, in forms of work in hand. And then when the horse knows a little bit where his feet are and that he can distribute the weight a little differently from the way he's used to, then you can move on to the more athletic training, like lunging, double lunging. Then you can develop muscles, cardiovascular conditioning, and so on. And then by moving in a healthier balance, the horses develop the top line muscles, also the belly muscles, the hindquarters, and you begin the process always with lunging the horse on a round circle in a steady tempo with sufficient energy, not too much, not too little. And as a result of that, the horse develops balance. When he is balanced, he can relax the paw.
Okay, you can continue.
Yeah, so when the horse is in balance, he can lift his back and his withers, he can relax the paw, and from that foundation you can develop the rest of the training. And when the horse, for example, is not able yet to balance himself at the lunge line in the walk and the trot, if he can't make a round circle in a steady tempo without anybody sitting on his back, then he most certainly won't be able to do this with the weight of the rider on his back. And when you're lunging the horse and you have the round circle, the steady tempo, you will also see that the horse is starting to take a steady contact on the lunge line. And the same thing then happens under saddle when you can ride, a round circle or a straight line in a steady tempo. The horse will balance himself and relax and start to take a steady contact with the reins, and then you can establish a nice power circuit, so to speak, energy circuit. So the energy impulses of the hind legs are transmitted from the pelvis to the spine, and then one vertebra at a time to the reins and back through the reins and the rider's seat to the hind legs. You can support the work at the lunge line by work in hand. With the work in hand, you can connect the horse's feet to the ground and to the reins. You can do a little sidestepping to create a better lateral suppleness and better lateral balance. Sidestepping loosens up the muscles around the hindquarters, around the hip joints. That helps the horse later too when it's time to ride again. You can do a little long reining, then you have a few more options of engaging the inside or the outside hind leg. So each training method has its advantages and disadvantages, and you can switch from one to the other, right? You can incorporate double lunging because there you have an outside rein, so you can influence the horse in more different ways than just with a single lunge line. The outside rein could half fold into the outside hind leg, the inside rein can flex the horse a little to the inside, the outside rein can flex a little to the outside. When you're double lunging, right, with a single lunge line, it's difficult to access the outside pair of legs, and you cannot position the horse to the outside. Of course, you can only flex a little to the inside if you have a single lunge line. So they all have their pros and cons, of their advantages and disadvantages. So let's get started. So when you're starting to build the top line of the horse, it's often useful to do this on the ground first, because gravity has the effect of the rider's weight pushing the horse's back down, which makes it harder for the horse to lift the back and develop those muscles. So it's often a good idea to begin with some work on the ground that helps the horse feel where his feet are and shift the weight. And so there's a variety of things you can do, a variety of techniques, and we're exploring a range of options at the moment. Some of them are based on Feldenkrais. That is what I'm doing here. It's something that Catherine McCrum is developing, and I'm trying it out as she's sharing it with us. So it's very interesting. It's a very interesting thing. It helps the horse to explore other movement patterns and different weight distributions. It's very gentle and has a sort of a grounding effect on the horse and on the human in a way as well. So it's very, very interesting. You can feel where the horse resists, against the weight shift, and you feel where the horse likes to have the weight, and you can get the horse to explore other options without, feeling threatened or without getting nervous. Like sometimes under saddle, when you want the horse to shift the weight, sometimes they get a little nervous because they think they could fall down. If it's a balance that they're not used to. And here on the ground, you can do this calmly, safely, so the horse doesn't worry about falling over. Then an important part of work without the rider and building the top line is the lunging. So we just lunge with a cabeçon and lunge line. Typically here, I have a saddle on the horse because I use that as a warm-up. I was going to ride him afterwards. And I like to lunge the horses before getting on them, so that they get a chance to move around without my weight on their back, and they get a chance to stretch a little bit and lift the back and so on. So the stirrups slid down because there's not enough stirrup leather left over to wrap it around the stirrup. So I start with the stirrups up, and then with the trotting or cantering, it gradually
slides down, and I didn't bother to put it back up. It doesn't bother the horse here. With some horses that are very sensitive on their sides, green horses, it can sometimes be useful to lunge them with the stirrups down so they get used to something touching the sides. And oops, there he got a little exuberant here. So, and then brought him back. The video looks actually like it's playing a little faster than he was moving in real time. That's happened before, that I noticed that the video looks faster than I remember the horse moving in real life, right? So, yeah, and you can do some trot canter transitions at the lunge line, and then, bring him back to a quiet, calmer trot, so the horse balances himself. And it's important that they learn to move on a round circle, so they're not falling in, drifting out. And you want to establish a steady tempo, and then you see when the horse has found it that they start stretching a little bit. Then you can go straight on the long side a little bit, and then as you go straight, you can either keep the tempo, or you can or the stride length, or you can lengthen the strides a little bit. And you can give little half halts against the inside front or inside hind, so you can flex a little to the inside. You can regulate the tempo, slow down a little when the inside hind leg is on the ground, for example. And I like to move up and down the arena so that there are some straight lines in there. Not everything is on the circle. And so there you go. Then you do some walk breaks so the horse can catch his breath, and so you can practice transitions. And that's often a good warm-up. Then you can also see whether how the horse is moving. You see how balanced he is, or whether he's tense or relaxed, or whether he has excess energy, or whether he's sluggish on that day, etc. And most horses benefit from being able to move a little bit without weight on their back before you get on, and let them stretch a little bit forward, downward before riding. And if a horse cannot go on a round circle in a steady tempo, then he's not really balanced enough to carry the rider, right? So I personally wouldn't sit on a horse that can't go on a round circle in a steady tempo at the lunge line, at the trot. Canter is not so necessary. Some horses don't have a good canter. They are so out of balance that they would just race around, and I would not canter on the lunge line until they're more balanced overall. But when they can do a nicely balanced walk and trot on the circle line, then you can add the weight of the rider. But if the horse can't even really cope with his own body and his own weight, then adding the weight of the rider can only make things worse, in a sense. Then, in addition to the normal lunging, I like to do double lunging. There you have a little bit more influence on the horse, and you can rig the lunge lines up in a variety of ways. Here I have the inside lunge line rigged up as a bending rein, so everything you do with the inside rein has a bit of a bending effect. You can also attach it directly to the inside snaffle ring. You could also attach it to a cavesson instead, so the advantage of double lunging is that you have an outside rein, so you could connect the outside rein to the outside pair of legs, so you can half hold into the outside hind, which you can't really do with a single lunge line. The outside rein can turn the shoulder and so on. You could counter flex if you want to. And so you have a little bit more options, and you can have a little bit more, sophisticated conversation, I guess, a conversation with a bigger vocabulary than if you have just a single lunge line. And here I use the surcingle over the saddle, so I can attach the two lunge lines higher or lower, and have, you know, options, so to speak, of how high or low I attach them. And again, I used that in preparation for riding. So I had the saddle on the horse and then the surcingle on top. The saddle also stabilizes the surcingle. That's an additional advantage, and it can't slide. If you have a horse that doesn't have much withers, then the surcingle stays in place better when you have the saddle underneath it. And there you can also ask the horse or allow the horse to stretch. You can do transitions, walk, trot, canter, etc. You can go straight on the long side. You could lengthen the strides on the long side. So you can make the work varied and interesting at the double lunge line as well. Then here we have a horse who already knows the piaffe, as you can see. So I like to do work in hand with the horses too. And initially it's very simple stuff, you know, just sidestepping a little on the circle at the walk, or some walk halt transitions. And if the horses already know some piaffe, you can use that actually to warm them up. You can do it to energize them. That can have an advantage. That's a horse that hasn't done much work in hand yet, so he does a little sidestepping here. And so I like to use that Portuguese version of work in hand, where I basically just have the snaffle bit and then a whip, and so I can ask the horse to sidestep a little with the whip, and with the outside rein I can half hold, frame the shoulder, and so on. And so I do a variety of things. Little here shouldering on the long side. I do something related on the circle, and these transitions here. You could stop into the outside hind leg, for example. That helps you bring the inside hind under the body. So with that setup, you have a variety of options. And so I do turns on the forehand in motion. It supples the hips. This is also a good preparation for riding, because you can play with the balance, you can supple different areas of the body. With the sidestepping, you can supple the hips very well. You can bring the inside hind leg under the body. Then if you ride afterwards, it's easier to get the horse engaged and balanced, etc. But when you have the hind legs gathered up under the body, then the horses usually want to stretch forward downward sooner or later. So you can use that also to create an incentive for the horse to stretch forward downward. And so we can do a variety of things. You can do some walk trot transitions. You can do voltas, straight lines. Here it's a little bit of a shoulder in again. And there we did a turn on the haunches, different horse. That can be a useful thing to put some weight on the inside hind and to mobilize the shoulders. So you can really play with a variety of options. And the beginning is always very simple, of course, just straight on the long side, walk halt transitions, little sidestepping on the circle, change of direction, with the younger ones, through turns on the forehand, and then here with this one, turns on the haunches were a useful thing to do to flex that inside hind leg more. So then these different movements play with the weight distribution. You can shift the weight from one side to the other, or from the front legs to the hind legs, etc. And so you can engage the hind legs, you can flex the hind legs, you can supple the hind legs depending on what you're doing. And then, the more supple they are, the better they step under the body, the more they can support the back. And so sometimes I go back and forth. Here I did several turns on the haunches in a row. And with other horses, you can combine turns on the haunches, turns on the forehand with each other. So they do different things, but they're all very useful. And that also contributes to better body awareness for the horse. They learn to feel where their feet are when you do that. They learn to distribute their weight differently, more to the left, more to the right, more to the back, etc. So then sometimes I just let them take a break and think, and of course there's grass to eat, so it's a little distraction. So. Yeah, so that's the turn on the forehand in motion. That's a great hip suppling exercise. It's a good way also to engage the inside hind leg. Yeah, then you can touch a hind leg, make him pick it up. If he's not standing square, you can touch the hind leg that's out and ask him to bring it under the body and so on. That's sometimes a good reminder for him to think of that hind leg. Don't forget it. Don't forget to bring it. Right, and so when you combine walk and trot and canter and straight lines and voltas and little sidestepping and so on, then the work becomes interesting and varied, and the horses develop better balance. You see the transition into the leg yield is a bit of a challenge for him because he has to shift the weight more onto the outside hind leg, and that's initially difficult. I think it was probably one of the first times I did that with him. So first time he's a little surprised that he has to move over, and but there you see how he wants to stretch, right? Because we shifted the weight onto the left hind leg and we brought the right hind under the body. Then you see how he wants to lower the neck to. And that's typical, right? When you engage the hind legs, flex the hind legs, the horses will sooner or later ask if they're allowed to lower the neck a little bit, to relieve the hind legs a little bit. So some horses want to stretch forward downward right away, right? Because they're built that way that it suggests itself to the horse. Other horses would never think of lowering the neck and stretching unless you engage the hind legs, flex the hind legs, so they feel like, now this is starting to feel like work, and I feel my thighs burning a little bit, and then they lower the head and neck to relieve the hind legs a little bit. So this combination of leg yielding and voltas is always a good gymnastic exercise. You can ride it, you can do it in hand. And then you see how it stretches the outside of the body a little bit too, the leg yield part. And so it creates a better bend. It gets the weight off of the inside shoulder, more towards the outside hind. So it's a good tool to shift the weight. And then gradually the quality of the gait improves, the balance improves. And another type of groundwork that we do is long reining. And you can do very simple stuff. You can just do some walk and trot. For developing the top line, it's useful if you do these big circles with a little enlarging or letting the croup yield onto a bigger circle. I mean, with a more trained horse, you can do pretty much everything. At the long rein, you can do canter pirouettes and tempo changes and piaffe and passage and so on. But to develop the top line, this sort of exercise is really useful to engage the inside hind a little bit at the walk or at the trot, and that creates a stretch on the outside of the body, and then eventually they will want to stretch forward downward too. And then here I let him go forward a little bit more. Luckily it's a short horse, so it's not that hard. So it's a good exercise, that where the horse doesn't have to carry any weight, so there is no pressure on the back, and you can engage the hind leg. So you have a few more options here at the long rein than what you have in hand or on the lunge line or double lunge line. You can change direction. There he offered the canter. That wasn't really my intention, but when they offer it, you take it, right? Especially if they're not, confirmed yet with the canter, then you don't want them to get the idea that it's something you don't want. And yeah, exactly. Then the canter typically improves the trot too. Yeah, I pushed him a little bit so to go forward. And yeah, so here I let him go forward a little bit. Here normally long reining is more of a collecting type of work, but if you can keep up, it's sometimes useful to alternate little sidestepping with a little forward, especially if you have a horse that tends to maybe set back a little bit, and then that can be a good thing to do, to go forward in between. If the horse isn't too big, if you can keep up with them. So you can combine little sidestepping with going forward, or sidestepping with turning, sidestepping with bending, and that makes the horse more supple and improves the balance. Yeah, one of the dangers of long reining is that the horses can get behind the aids, so that's why it's important that you let them go forward enough, or encourage them to go forward, so they don't get behind the aids. When they're behind the aids, they're no longer using the right muscles, they're no longer developing the top line, right? And so you have to sometimes mix the more collected work with bigger trot, or more, a little lengthening of the stride. And so initially you would start with just walk and a little bit of trot, circle, whole school, little sidestepping on the circle, and then as the horses get more trained, you can add the lateral movements. You can do your shoulder in, haunches in, half pass, and everything at the long rein as well. And later you can add the canter and so on. So yeah, that's a horse that sometimes doesn't go forward enough. So I'm always happy when he offers it, when he wants to go forward. So I encourage that. And then here we did a few piaffe steps here at the end. So if they know how to do it, you can incorporate that in the work. That's a good exercise to strengthen the hindquarters, and it can create engagement that makes the horse want to go forward again, right? It makes the horse want to stretch. So anytime you have the hind legs under the body and flexing, the horse will sooner or later want to stretch, and you can use that. And the combination of putting the horse together and then letting him stretch forward, downward, gradually develops the top line. So I hope that was interesting and gives you a little bit of an insight of different things you can do on the ground without sitting on the horse. And we'll see you in the next video. So in today's video, we showed you different types of groundwork: lunging, double lunging, work in hand, long reining, and these are the types of work we use to prepare the horses, the green horses, for the work under saddle. It's something we do throughout the horses' working life to supplement the riding. And when you have a horse that is coming back from an injury, a longer layup, or if you have a horse that has a weak top line and needs to get stronger before riding, then this is a great way to build strength, build the muscles of the top line and the hindquarters. And it's much easier for the horse to find his balance without the weight of the rider first. And especially if the back is still weak, hindquarters are weak, then it's much healthier for the horse to develop the musculature without the weight of the rider. Because of course, if you put your own, body mass on the horse's back, the back will tend to drop and to sag unless the horse is fairly strong. And the lunging and the work in hand and so on is a great way to build those muscles so that the horse can handle the rider's weight more easily. So it would be interesting for us to hear what types of groundwork you have done. Have you done any of the ones we showed you? Have you done other ones? Which types of work, in hand, lunging, long reining, would you like to learn or learn more in depth, you can post that in the group. And looking forward to seeing you on day 5.